"Filthy savage," Vernon Slade bellowed, his boots kicking up dust as he stormed toward Hastiin with armed men by the Arizona River. Hastiin froze, his silver tools catching the morning light, while Awinita, fragile and trembling, clung to her stone sketches. Slade's men spat accusations of stolen silver, their voices dripping with scorn. And when Slade shoved Awinita into the freezing river, her cries tore through the air. In a surge of fury, Hastiin brandished his carving knife, grazing Slade's arm, only to face the cold barrels of guns. Branded a fugitive, Hastiin stood at an agonizing crossroads. Flee with Awinita into the harsh desert or surrender, sacrificing his freedom for her safety. Hastiin, a 32-year-old Navajo silversmith and storyteller, bore the grief of his parents' death in a violent militia raid, his heart heavy yet burning with devotion to his 20-year-old sister Awinita, whose spirit was broken by abuse at a boarding school. In Arizona in 1899, he shaped silver with unsteady hands to afford her treatment, while his unspoken love for Ellen, a compassionate white aid worker, stirred whispers of disgrace in a town steeped in racial venom. Rejected by white miners for shunning their brutal labor, Hastiin faced a world that scorned him, torn between saving Awinita and fighting a society that marked him as an outcast, with Slade's wrath looming over every choice. The Arizona sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the river where Hastiin knelt, his hands steady as he carved a silver bracelet. Each stroke of his tool etched Navajo patterns, a silent prayer to earn enough for Awinita's medicine. His sister sat nearby, her thin fingers tracing circles on a flat stone, her eyes distant yet soft. Hastiin glanced at her, his heart tightening at her frail frame, haunted by memories of their parents' death. The river's gentle ripple reminded him of his father's stories, tales of resilience that now felt like burdens. He counted his remaining silver, barely enough for one more piece, and whispered a vow to his mother's spirit. He would protect Awinita no matter the cost. A sparrow darted across the sky, its wings a fleeting sign of hope, but Hastiin's chest ached with worry. He adjusted his tools, determined to finish the bracelet before dusk, unaware of the storm about to break. Awinita sat cross-legged, her stone canvas dusted with chalky lines as she drew endless spirals, each one a fragment of her shattered mind. Her soft hum, a Navajo lullaby, trembled in the air, broken by pauses as if she forgot the words. Hastiin watched her, his throat tight, wishing he could pull her back from the shadows of the boarding school's cruelty. She picked up a red pebble, smearing color across her drawing, her lips curling into a faint smile that broke his heart. A sudden breeze scattered her chalk dust, and Awinita froze, her eyes wide with panic, as if the wind stole a piece of her soul. Hastiin called her name, but she stared at the river, lost in a memory she couldn't voice. She clutched the stone tighter, her knuckles pale, and whispered something about home. Hastiin turned back to his silver, fighting the urge to hold her, knowing her fragile piece could shatter any moment. Ellen's footsteps crunched on the path, her basket heavy with bread and apples as she approached the river. Her simple dress swayed, and her tied-back hair caught the sunlight, making Hastiin's breath catch with unspoken longing. She knelt beside Awinita, offering a slice of bread with a gentle smile, her voice soft as she asked about the girl's drawings. Awinita didn't respond, but her shoulders eased, and Hastiin felt a rush of gratitude for Ellen's kindness. He thanked her, his words clumsy, his eyes betraying a warmth he couldn't confess. Ellen's face clouded as she mentioned the townsfolk watching her, suspicious of her visits to the Navajo. She touched Awinita's hand, promising to return soon, and Hastiin's heart sank at the risk she took for them. As Ellen stood to leave, her gaze lingered on him, a silent vow that mirrored his own, binding them in a forbidden hope. Hooves thundered in the distance, and Hastiin's hand stilled as Vernon Slade burst into view, his black vest stark against the desert haze. 5 armed men followed, their rifles glinting, and Slade's voice boomed, accusing Hastiin of stealing silver from his mine. Hastiin rose, his jaw tight, and declared the silver his own, crafted from scraps he'd saved. Slade sneered, calling him a dirty Navajo liar, his words cutting deeper than any blade. Ellen stepped forward, her voice sharp, demanding Slade stop, but he ignored her, ordering his men to search Hastien's tools. A rifleman kicked over Hastien's bag, scattering his chisels, and Hastien's fists clenched, fury rising like a tide. Awinita whimpered, curling into herself, and Hastiin forced himself to stay calm, knowing one wrong move could end them all. Slade's eyes gleamed with malice, daring Hastiin to fight back. Slade's gaze fell on Awinita, and his lip curled as he mocked her, calling her a crazy Indian brat. Awinita shrank back, her hands pressed to her ears, her body trembling near the river's edge. Hastien's blood boiled, his vision narrowing, but he bit his tongue, knowing violence would doom them. One of Slade's men laughed, echoing the insult, and Ellen shouted at Slade to leave the girl alone, her face flushed with anger. Awinita's soft sobs broke through, her voice mumbling broken words, and Hastiin stepped in front of her, his body a shield. Slade smirked, taunting Hastiin to do something, his hand twitching toward his gun. Hastien's heart pounded, torn between protecting Awinita and avoiding a fight he couldn't win. Awinita's fingers clutched his sleeve, her fear a weight that anchored his rage. Slade lunged, shoving Awinita hard, and she stumbled into the river with a scream, the cold water swallowing her frail form. Hastiin dove after her, his hands grasping her arms as she thrashed, her cries sharp with terror. He pulled her to the bank, her soaked clothes clinging to her shivering body, and held her close, whispering her name. Slade's men raised their rifles, barking at Hastiin to let her go, their voices a wall of menace. Hastiin glared at Slade, his voice raw as he demanded they leave, but Slade laughed, stepping closer with a raised fist. Ellen struggled against a militiaman's grip, yelling for them to stop, her voice cracking with desperation. Awinita clung to Hastiin, her breaths shallow, and then her eyes rolled back, her body limp in his arms. Hastien's world tilted, fear and rage colliding as he faced the men who threatened to destroy them. Hastien's hand found his carving knife, its blade flashing as he pointed it at Slade, his voice a low growl ordering him back. Slade's eyes widened, then narrowed, spitting curses and calling Hastiin a gutless savage. In the chaos, Hastiin lunged, the knife grazing Slade's arm, drawing a thin line of blood. Slade howled, clutching his wound, and vowed Hastiin would hang for this. The militiamen cocked their rifles, but Ellen broke free, throwing herself between Hastiin and the guns, her voice pleading for peace. Hastiin lowered the knife, his chest heaving, realizing the weight of what he'd done. Slade backed off, his face twisted with rage, promising to return with the sheriff. Hastiin knelt by Awinita, his hands shaking as he brushed wet hair from her face, guilt and dread knotting his stomach. Ellen knelt beside Hastiin, her hands gentle as she helped wrap Awinita in a dry blanket, though the girl remained unconscious, her breaths faint. Hastien's voice cracked as he apologized, blaming himself for failing to protect his sister, his eyes burning with unshed tears. A militiaman lingered, shouting that Hastiin was now a wanted man, his crime etched in Slade's blood. Ellen begged the man to give them time, her words desperate, but he spat at her feet and rode off to report to Slade. Hastiin checked Awinita's pulse, his heart sinking at her clammy skin, fearing the river's chill had worsened her condition. He gathered his scattered tools, his movements mechanical, knowing they couldn't stay here. Ellen promised to find help in town, her eyes fierce with resolve, and left reluctantly, glancing back at Hastiin. He stared at the river, its calm surface mocking the storm raging inside him. Sheriff Baxter arrived at the riverbank by noon, his badge gleaming as he nailed a wanted poster to a tree, Hastien's name scrawled in bold. The poster promised a reward, and whispers of Hastien's attack spread among the townsfolk, painting him as a dangerous outlaw. A Navajo boy ran to Hastiin, breathless, relaying the news, and Hastien's stomach churned, the weight of his new label crushing him. He hid Awinita behind a cluster of bushes, her shallow breaths a constant reminder of his failure. Baxter's voice echoed, ordering his men to scour the area, their horses trampling the earth. Hastien clutched his knife, his mind racing, knowing staying meant capture. He whispered a prayer to his ancestors, begging for strength to keep Awinita safe. The boy pointed to the desert, urging Hastiin to flee, and Hastiin nodded, his resolve hardening despite the fear gnawing at his bones. Hastiin sat by Awinita, her pale face lit by the fading sun, and weighed his choices, each one a blade to his heart. Surrender might bring Awinita to a doctor, but the white man's jail would strip his freedom, perhaps his life. He remembered his father's words, that a Navajo spirit thrived in liberty, and his chest ached with defiance. Awinita stirred, her eyes fluttering open, and she grabbed his hand, whispering, "Don't leave me," her voice frail but piercing. Hastien's throat tightened, and he decided to run, vowing to find a way to save her. He packed his silver bracelets, hoping to trade them for medicine, and lifted Awinita, her weight light as a child's. As they slipped into the desert under a starry sky, a single bright star shone above, a flicker of hope in the darkness. Hastiin held his sister close, his steps heavy with fear but driven by love. The desert night wrapped Hastiin and Awinita in its cold embrace as he carried her to a small cave, its jagged mouth hidden by thorny bushes. He set her down on a bed of dry leaves, her shallow breaths barely stirring the silence. Hastiin lit a tiny fire, its weak glow flickering against the stone walls, but he kept it low, fearing the smoke might betray them. Awinita's face, pale and clammy, twisted his heart. He tucked his worn jacket around her, whispering promises of safety. He rummaged through his bag, finding only a crust of bread from Ellen, and fed her small bites, her lips trembling with each swallow. A distant coyote's howl sent a shiver down his spine, and he gripped his knife, eyes scanning the dark. He carved a Navajo protection symbol into the cave floor, praying for his ancestors' guidance. As Awinita slept, Hastiin sat awake, his body heavy with dread, knowing the desert offered no mercy to fugitives like them. Morning brought no relief as Awinita woke burning with fever, her eyes glassy and her voice a faint whimper calling for their mother. Hastiin pressed a damp cloth to her forehead, his hand shaking as he realized the river's chill had sunk deep into her bones. He searched the cave for water, finding only a trickle seeping through the rocks, barely enough to wet her lips. Her fevered murmurs about the boarding school's cruelties stabbed at his heart, and he cursed himself for not protecting her sooner. He gave her the last of Ellen's bread, but she could barely swallow, her coughs echoing in the cave. Hastien's chest tightened with panic. Without medicine, Awinita might not survive. He looked out at the endless sand, torn between staying hidden and risking a trip to find help. A lone vulture circled above, its shadow a grim reminder of their fragile hope. But Hastiin vowed to fight for his sister's life. Ellen's figure appeared at the cave's entrance, her face flushed from the desert trek, a small bag of medicine and water slung over her shoulder. Hastien's heart leaped, relief mixing with fear as she knelt beside Awinita, pouring water into her mouth with steady hands. She explained how to give the medicine, her voice calm but her eyes darting, wary of being followed. Ellen admitted the townsfolk suspected her of aiding Hastiin, and Slade's men were watching her every move. Hastiin grasped her hand, his voice thick with gratitude and guilt for the danger she faced. She brushed off his thanks, her fingers lingering on his, a quiet strength passing between them. Ellen warned him to move soon, as Baxter's men were closing in, and promised to find a doctor. As she slipped back into the desert, Hastiin watched her go, his heart torn between hope and the weight of her sacrifice. Hastiin sat by the fire's dying embers, Awinita's fever unbroken, and read Ellen's note again, its words of courage steadying his trembling hands. He scratched an apology on a flat stone, vowing to give it to her if they survived, his chest aching with unspoken love. He spoke softly to Awinita about Ellen's kindness, hoping his words reached her through the fever's haze. Awinita stirred, her voice a whisper saying, "She's good," and Hastien's eyes stung, moved by her trust. He recalled their first meeting with Ellen, her gentle smile a light in their dark world, and his resolve hardened to protect them both. He checked their supplies, finding only a few silver bracelets, and prayed they'd be enough to trade for medicine. A meteor streaked across the sky, and Hastiin took it as a sign, whispering a prayer for strength. He held Awinita's hand, determined to carve a path through the danger closing in. Dust rose on the horizon, and Hastien's heart sank as he spotted Gideon, Slade's cruel right-hand man, tracking Ellen's footprints toward the cave. He hid Awinita behind a boulder, his knife ready, every muscle tense with fear. Gideon's shadow loomed closer, his low chuckle chilling the air as he noted the cave's entrance, muttering about the reward for Hastien's head. Hastiin held his breath, praying Awinita stayed silent, her fevered coughs muffled by his hand. Gideon scuffed the sand, leaving deep boot prints, and turned back, his horse's hooves fading into the distance. A raven cawed sharply, its cry jarring Hastien's nerves, as if warning of more danger. He later learned Gideon had reported Ellen's visit to Slade, branding her a traitor. Hastien's stomach twisted with guilt, knowing his fight now endangered Ellen, and he swore to keep her safe, no matter the cost. Hastien's fingers brushed against a strange object in the cave, a small silver piece etched with a Navajo symbol he didn't recognize. He turned it over, puzzled, its edges worn as if placed deliberately. Awinita, stirring weakly, mumbled, "The silversmith," her words cryptic but heavy with meaning. Hastiin recalled old tales of a guide who left signs for the lost, and his pulse quickened, wondering if this was a clue or a trap. He sketched the symbol in the dirt, studying its curves, but found no answers. The silver felt warm in his hand, a faint spark of hope amid his fear. He hid it in his pocket, wary of its origin, and checked Awinita's fever, her skin still hot. Hastien's mind raced, torn between staying put and seeking the source of this mysterious sign, his heart pounding with the weight of their uncertain fate. A shadow moved in the moonlight, and Hastien's grip tightened on his knife as a cloaked figure, the silversmith, placed another silver piece near the cave and vanished. Hastiin crept after him, his boots silent on the sand, but found only faint footprints leading nowhere. The new silver bore words, "The river dies by Slade's hand." Hastien's breath caught, linking the message to Awinita's illness, his mind flashing to the river's murky water. He hid the silver, shielding Awinita from its ominous warning, her fevered sleep too fragile for more fear. The desert silence felt heavy, as if the ancestors watched, urging him forward. Hastien's heart raced with questions about the silversmith's motives, but the message ignited a fire in him. He knelt by Awinita, vowing to uncover the truth, even if it led him straight into Slade's grasp. Hastiin clutched the silver pieces, their cryptic symbols gnawing at his mind as he sat by Awinita's side, her coughs weaker now. He recalled a Navajo legend of a shadowed guide, a protector or trickster, and wondered if the silversmith was friend or foe. His gut screamed caution, trusting only Ellen and Awinita in this world of betrayal. He tucked the silver away, fearing Slade's men might find it, and traced Awinita's pale face, his heart breaking at her fading strength. A sudden wind howled through the cave, chilling his bones, as if warning of danger. Hastiin spoke to Awinita, promising to unravel the silversmith's riddle, but her silence deepened his fear. He prayed to the ancestors, begging for clarity, his voice trembling with doubt. The cave's shadows seemed to shift, urging him to act, but Hastien's resolve wavered, torn between hope and suspicion. Dogs barked in the distance, and Hastien's blood ran cold as Baxter's militia swept toward the cave, their torches cutting through the night. He smothered the fire, its embers hissing, and pulled Awinita behind a rock, her fevered body limp in his arms. Baxter's voice barked orders, his men spotting Ellen's footprints in the sand, their laughter cruel as they closed in. Hastiin pressed his hand over Awinita's mouth, stifling her coughs, his heart pounding so loud he feared they'd hear it. A militiaman's boot crunched near the cave's entrance, and Hastiin gripped his knife, ready to fight. A gunshot rang out, a warning shot, and Hastien's stomach lurched, picturing Awinita caught in their hands. He whispered a desperate prayer, begging the ancestors to hide them. The militia's shouts grew closer, their torches casting monstrous shadows, trapping Hastiin in a moment of pure terror. A stone clattered outside, and Hastiin froze as the silversmith appeared, his cloaked form darting through the dark, luring Baxter's men away with a thrown rock. Hastiin seized the chance, lifting Awinita, and following the silversmith into a narrow tunnel hidden in the cave's depths. The passage was tight, its sharp rock scraping Hastien's arms as he carried his sister, her weight heavy with fever. The silversmith moved silently, gesturing for haste, his face obscured by shadow. They emerged in a rocky ravine, the militia's shouts fading behind them, and Hastien's chest burned with relief. The silversmith vanished without a word, leaving Hastiin alone with Awinita under a starless sky. He checked her pulse, weak but steady, and whispered thanks to the ancestors, his heart racing with gratitude and fear. Hastiin held Awinita close, knowing their escape was only a fleeting victory in a war far from won. Hastiin led Awinita to a quiet bend of the river, her steps faltering as he searched for clean water to ease her fever. Kneeling by the bank, he spotted a glass vial half buried in the mud, its golden liquid glinting with an unnatural sheen. He pried it free, wrinkling his nose at its sharp chemical stench, his gut twisting with suspicion. Awinita coughed, her voice weak as she said the river tasted bitter yesterday, and Hastien's eyes widened, noticing dead fish floating nearby. He tucked the vial into his pocket, linking it to the silversmith's warning about Slade's hand in the river's death. His heart raced, fearing the water had poisoned Awinita, deepening her illness. He scanned the horizon, wary of Slade's men, and whispered a prayer to the ancestors for answers. Holding Awinita's trembling hand, Hastiin vowed to uncover the vial's secrets, his resolve burning despite the danger lurking in every shadow. Under the moon's pale light, Hastiin crept into Slade's camp, his heart pounding as he dodged the glow of campfires. He slipped behind a stack of crates, holding his breath as two militiamen passed, their laughter grating in the still night. Inside a tent, he found a crate of papers, his fingers trembling as he sifted through maps and letters. One letter, stamped with the name Carter, detailed a plan to poison the river and seize Navajo land. Hastien's blood ran cold, the words blurring as he realized Slade's cruelty reached far beyond him. He stuffed the letter into his shirt, but a guard's shout froze him, boots thudding closer. He bolted into the dark, branches snagging his clothes, and hid beneath a bush, his chest heaving. The letter felt heavy against his skin, a dangerous truth that could save his people or doom him, and Hastien's mind raced with the weight of what he'd found. Hastiin clutched the stolen letter, rereading it by the faint light of dawn, his eyes tracing the map marking Navajo land for Carter's gold mines. The letter confirmed Slade's role in forging reports to steal the land, using the poisoned river to drive the Navajo away. His stomach churned, picturing Awinita drinking from the tainted water, her fever a direct result of Slade's greed. He folded the letter, his hands shaking with rage, and swore to stop Slade, no matter the cost. Awinita slept fitfully nearby, her coughs weaker, and Hastian's heart ached, fearing he was losing her. He recalled the silversmith's silver piece, its warning now clear, and felt the ancestors urging him forward. He hid the letter in his bag, glancing at the desert, knowing Slade's men were hunting him. Hastiin knelt by Awinita, promising to protect their home, his voice thick with determination. Hastiin sat by Awinita in their new hiding spot, a shallow overhang of rock, her fevered face lit by the setting sun. He whispered about the letter, his voice breaking as he admitted the plan's scale overwhelmed him. Awinita's eyes fluttered, unseeing, and Hastian's chest tightened, feeling utterly alone against Slade's power. He considered turning himself in, hoping it might get Awinita to a doctor, but the thought of chains crushed his spirit. Staring at the stars, he felt abandoned by the ancestors, his prayers unanswered. He held Awinita's hand, tears falling as he begged her to hold on, his guilt a heavy stone in his heart. A lone owl hooted, its cry sharp in the silence, and Hastiin took it as a sign to keep fighting. He wiped his face, vowing not to give up, his love for Awinita the only light in his darkening world. Ellen arrived at dusk, her face pale but determined, carrying a small vial of medicine and a water skin. Hastian's heart lifted, and he showed her the letter, his voice urgent as he explained Slade's plan. Ellen's eyes widened, her fingers tracing the words, and she confirmed the vial's contents matched the letter's description of mine waste. She offered to keep the vial as evidence, her voice steady despite the risk. Hastiin hesitated, fearing for her safety, but her fierce gaze silenced his doubts. She knelt by Awinita, administering the medicine, and Hastian's throat tightened with gratitude and fear for Ellen's courage. Ellen warned that Gideon was watching her, and they had little time. As she left, her hand brushed Hastian's, a fleeting warmth that steeled his resolve, though his heart ached knowing she walked back into danger for him. Gideon's shadow fell across the desert path as he ambushed Ellen, his rough hands binding her wrists as he snarled questions about Hastian's hideout. Ellen stood firm, her chin high, even as he pressed a knife to her throat, demanding answers. He snatched the vial from her bag, smashing it into the sand, its golden liquid seeping away. Gideon dragged her to Slade's camp, his grip bruising, and reported her betrayal, his voice dripping with glee. Slade ordered Ellen locked in a mine shed, her shouts muffled as a guard gagged her. A Navajo woman, hidden in the brush, saw it all and ran to warn Hastiin, her breath ragged with fear. Hastian's heart stopped when he heard, his fists clenching as he pictured Ellen's kind face in chains. He swore to free her, his rage a fire that drowned out his fear, knowing every second brought her closer to harm. Hastiin tracked Gideon to the mine, his pulse hammering as he slipped past patrolling guards, their lanterns casting long shadows. He spotted Gideon by the shed, twirling his knife, and threw a stone to lure him away, the clatter echoing in the night. Hastiin pried open the shed's lock, finding Ellen bound, her eyes wide with relief. He cut her ropes, whispering apologies, his hands shaking with urgency. Gideon's shout rang out, his gun raised, but Hastiin tackled him, the two crashing into the dirt. Ellen grabbed a plank, striking Gideon's arm, and they fled into the dark, branches snapping underfoot. They hid in a ditch, panting, as Gideon's curses faded, but the broken vial haunted Hastiin, their evidence lost. He held Ellen's hand, vowing to make Slade pay, his heart torn between gratitude and the guilt of her suffering. Hastiin returned to Awinita, his chest heavy as he found her barely conscious, her fever burning hotter despite Ellen's medicine. He fed her a sip of water, his voice cracking as he promised to find a doctor, though hope felt like a cruel lie. Awinita's lips moved, silent, and Hastiin sang a Navajo lullaby, his tears falling as memories of their childhood flooded back. He checked her pulse, weak and erratic, and his heart shattered, fearing she was slipping away. He clutched the letter, its words now a faint hope against her fading life. A desert wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the weight of his ancestors' silence. Hastiin held Awinita close, begging her to stay, his voice a raw plea against the darkness. He swore to fight for her, even as despair clawed at his soul, her life the only thing keeping him from surrender. Hastiin carried Awinita to a Navajo elder's tent, his arms aching but his heart heavier as he begged Taza for help. He showed Taza the letter, his voice urgent, explaining Slade's plan to poison the river and steal their land. Taza's eyes narrowed, his voice cold, accusing Hastiin of shaming the Navajo with his attack on Slade. He refused to act, fearing the militia's wrath, and ordered Hastiin to leave, his words cutting deep. Hastiin fell to his knees, pleading, but Taza turned away, his face hard. Awinita's coughs broke the silence, her frail body trembling, and Taza's gaze softened briefly, but he held firm. Hastiin stumbled out, his heart broken by his people's rejection, feeling like an outcast in his own land. He looked at Awinita, her trust in him unwavering, and vowed to fight alone if he must. Hastiin found another silver piece outside Taza's tent, its surface etched with the words, "Slade's vault, under the mine." His pulse quickened, the silversmith's message pointing to a hidden cache of secrets. He traced the words, his mind racing to the mine's dark tunnels, where Slade's plans might be exposed. Awinita, barely awake, smiled faintly, her voice a whisper urging him to go. Hastiin sketched a map in the dirt, marking the mine's entrance, his hands steady despite his fear. He hid the silver, wary of traps, and kissed Awinita's forehead, promising to return. A lone star blinked above, a sign he clung to as hope. Hastiin steeled himself, ready to risk everything to uncover Slade's vault, his heart pounding with the weight of his sister's life and his people's future. Hastiin slipped into the mine under cover of night, his heart pounding as he navigated the dark tunnels, the air thick with dust and the stench of sulfur. Lanterns hung sparsely, casting eerie shadows, and he pressed himself against the damp walls to avoid a patrolling guard's gaze. Deep in the mine, he found a hidden chamber, its door concealed behind crates, and pried it open with his knife. Inside, stacks of documents and maps spilled across a table, detailing Slade's plan to poison the river. Hastiin grabbed 3 letters, each stamped with Carter's seal, his hands trembling with the weight of their truth. A guard's footsteps echoed closer, and Hastiin stuffed the papers into his shirt, his breath hitching. He slipped out, but his foot caught a loose rock, sending a silver piece clattering to the ground. Hastiin froze, heart racing, as the guard's lantern swung toward the noise, but he melted into the shadows, vowing to deliver the evidence no matter the cost. Baxter's militia ambushed Hastiin outside the mine, their torches blazing as they spotted the silver piece he dropped, its glint betraying his presence. Baxter's voice roared, calling him a thief, and Hastiin sprinted into the desert, bullets whistling past his ears. He dove behind a boulder, his chest heaving, the letters pressed against his skin like a lifeline. Baxter ordered his men to set fire to the brush, and flames licked the dry grass, smoke stinging Hastian's eyes. He clutched his knife, ready to fight, but a deer crashed through the brush, drawing the militia's attention. Hastiin seized the moment, scrambling through the sand, his legs scraped raw by thorns. The letters felt heavier now, each word a step closer to justice, but his heart sank as he pictured Awinita waiting, her life fading. He whispered a prayer to the ancestors, begging for strength, as the fire's glow faded behind him. Hastiin found a trusted Navajo runner, a young man named Chi, and pressed the 3 letters into his hands, his voice urgent as he explained their importance. Chi nodded, his eyes fierce, promising to deliver them to a federal reporter in the next town, though fear flickered in his gaze. Hastiin scribbled a note summarizing Slade's plan, his handwriting shaky but clear, and tucked it with the letters. He kept 1 letter hidden in his bag, a backup against betrayal, his trust worn thin by the world's cruelty. Chi slipped into the night, his footsteps silent, and Hastiin prayed the ancestors would guide him safely. Returning to Awinita, he found her slightly stronger, her eyes meeting his with a spark of hope. He told her of the letters, his voice soft, and she squeezed his hand, her touch a fragile anchor. Hastiin looked to the stars, clinging to the chance that justice might save them. Smoke rose in the distance, and Hastien's heart plummeted as he realized Carter had ordered Slade's vault burned, destroying the remaining evidence. He ran to the mine, his lungs burning, only to find the chamber reduced to ash, charred papers crumbling under his touch. A militiaman laughed nearby, taunting that Hastien's fight was over, his words a knife to Hastien's spirit. He salvaged a singed scrap, its words barely legible, and tucked it into his pocket, desperation clawing at him. The loss felt like a betrayal by the ancestors, and Hastien's knees buckled, his hands gripping the earth. He pictured Awinita's fading breath, and rage surged, pushing him to stand. A guard's shout rang out, forcing Hastiin to flee, his boots pounding the sand. He hid in a crevice, vowing to fight on, the singed paper a faint ember of hope against the darkness swallowing him. Hastiin sat by Awinita, her labored breathing filling the silence as he confessed the vault's destruction, his voice hollow with defeat. He felt the weight of failure, each lost document a blow to their survival, and Awinita's weak hand touched his, her silence louder than words. He spoke of fleeing Arizona, a desperate dream of safety, but the thought felt like abandoning their ancestors. The singed paper lay in his lap, its fragments mocking his efforts, and Hastien's tears fell, his heart breaking for Awinita's suffering. A memory of Ellen's courage flashed in his mind, her defiance a spark that steadied him. He wiped his eyes, promising Awinita they'd fight on, his voice trembling but resolute. A soft breeze carried the scent of sage, and Hastiin took it as a sign, clinging to the hope that their struggle wasn't in vain. In her fevered sleep, Awinita mumbled about Slade, her voice faint but clear, describing him pouring golden liquid into the river. Hastien's breath caught, realizing she'd witnessed Slade's crime. Her words, a living testimony to his evil. She described the liquid's acrid smell, matching the vial Hastiin had found, and his heart raced, seeing her as their strongest evidence. Awinita's eyes opened, filled with fear, and she begged Hastiin not to let Slade find her. He held her close, promising protection, his voice fierce despite his own terror. He scratched her words onto a piece of leather, preserving her truth, his hands steady with purpose. Awinita's courage, shining through her pain, lit a fire in Hastien's soul. He kissed her forehead, vowing to use her testimony to bring Slade down, his heart swelling with pride and dread. Hastiin clutched Awinita's leather note, its words fueling his resolve as he carved a new silver bracelet, each stroke a pledge to fight. He spoke to her of confronting Slade, his voice steady, hiding the fear gnawing at his bones. Awinita smiled weakly, calling him a strong storyteller, her words a balm to his battered spirit. He prayed to the ancestors, feeling their presence in the desert's quiet, their strength flowing into him. Hastiin packed their meager supplies, ready to seek allies, his hands steady despite the danger. A great eagle soared above, its wings wide, and Hastiin saw it as a blessing, a call to rise. He held Awinita's hand, her trust anchoring him, and swore to bring justice, his heart a mix of hope and fierce determination. The desert stretched before him, vast and unforgiving, but Hastiin stepped forward, ready to face the storm. Ellen stood before Mrs. Slade's grand house, her heart pounding as the older woman's cold voice warned her to abandon Hastiin. Mrs. Slade's eyes gleamed with contempt, threatening to have Ellen banished from town if she defied her. Ellen's voice shook, but held firm, declaring Hastien's innocence, her loyalty to him unwavering. Mrs. Slade slapped her, the sting sharp, calling her a traitor to her own kind. Ellen turned away, her cheek burning, and slipped a note for Hastiin into her shoe, vowing to keep helping him. Gideon watched from the shadows, his smirk chilling her blood, tracking her every step. Ellen walked back to town, her head high, but fear gnawed at her, knowing Slade's wrath loomed. She thought of Hastien's quiet strength, her heart aching with love, determined to stand by him despite the cost. Hastiin gathered a small group of Navajo in a hidden canyon, his voice steady as he shared the singed paper and Awinita's testimony, revealing Slade's plan. Some nodded, their eyes fierce, but others whispered of the militia's power, fear holding them back. Hastiin read Awinita's words aloud, her courage stirring hearts, and an elder recounted tales of Navajo resistance, his voice strong. Hastiin called for unity, his hands outstretched, pleading for their land's future. A young woman agreed to spread the word, her face set with resolve, and others followed, their murmurs growing bold. Hastien's chest swelled with hope, though doubt lingered, knowing the fight would cost them dearly. He thanked them, his voice thick with emotion, feeling the ancestors' pride. As the group dispersed, Hastiin stood alone, the canyon's silence urging him to lead, his heart heavy but unbroken. Baxter's militia stormed the Navajo village at dawn, their boots trampling sacred ground as they seized Taza, accusing him of plotting rebellion. Taza struggled, his voice defiant, but a rifle butt struck his head, blood trickling down his face. Baxter shouted that Taza would die unless Hastiin surrendered, his words a chilling threat. A child escaped, running to Hastiin with the news, her eyes wide with terror. Hastien's heart thundered, rage and fear colliding as he pictured Taza's weathered face in chains. He hid Awinita in a new shelter, her fevered body trembling, and kissed her forehead, promising to return. A warrior offered to join him, but Hastiin refused, unwilling to risk more lives. He prayed to the ancestors, his voice raw, begging for the strength to save Taza and protect his people, his resolve afire against the morning's cold. Hastiin crept toward the jail under a moonless sky, his heart hammering as he gripped his carving knife, its blade glinting faintly. The wooden building loomed ahead, guarded by a single militiaman dozing by a lantern. Hastiin slipped through the shadows, his boots silent on the dirt, and wedged his knife into the lock, prying it open with a soft creak. Inside, Taza sat bound, his face bruised and bloodied, but his eyes flashed with defiance. Hastiin cut the ropes, whispering for Taza to move, his hands steady despite his fear. A guard shout shattered the silence, and Hastiin pulled Taza through a back door, dodging a bullet that splintered the wall. They stumbled into the forest, dogs barking in pursuit, and Hastien's chest burned with urgency. Supporting Taza's weakened frame, he prayed to the ancestors, his voice a desperate plea as they vanished into the trees. Taza's survival a spark of hope in the darkness. The silversmith emerged from the shadows, his cloak blending with the night, and Hastiin froze, knife raised, as the figure revealed himself as a former worker for Carter. He spoke quickly, his voice low, admitting he'd helped Slade poison the river but turned against them after seeing Navajo children die. He handed Hastiin a list of witnesses, names of men who'd seen Slade's crimes, and Hastian's heart raced, stunned by the ally he'd doubted. Taza nodded, his voice hoarse, saying the ancestors had chosen this man to guide them. The silversmith urged them to hurry, warning of Baxter's approaching men, and vanished into the dark. Hastiin clutched the list, his mind reeling at the truth, a mix of hope and suspicion swirling within. He supported Taza, vowing to use the list to end Slade's reign, his resolve hardened by the silversmith's unexpected confession. The silversmith led Hastiin and Taza to a miner named Jonah, a nervous man who'd seen Slade dump poison into the river. Jonah's hands shook as he described the barrels, their acrid stench matching Awinita's testimony, and Hastian's pulse quickened, seeing a path to justice. Jonah feared Slade's wrath but agreed to testify if protected, his voice trembling but resolute. Hastiin wrote down every word, his hand steady, preserving the truth on a scrap of cloth. Taza's eyes gleamed with pride, calling Hastiin a true Navajo warrior, and Hastian's chest swelled, though fear lingered. Jonah offered a hideout, a shack beyond the desert, and Hastiin thanked him, his voice thick with gratitude. A distant howl echoed, urging them to move, and Hastiin helped Taza away, the miners' words a lifeline in their fight. Hastiin and Taza returned to the village, their steps heavy but determined, and gathered the Navajo in a clearing, their faces lit by firelight. Taza spoke first, his voice strong despite his wounds, recounting Jonah's testimony and the ancestors' call to resist. Hastiin held up Awinita's leather note, reading her words, her courage silencing doubts, and the crowd murmured with resolve. A woman suggested a public ceremony to expose Slade, her voice bold, and others agreed, their unity a growing flame. Hastian's heart lifted, feeling the strength of his people, though he feared the militia's response. Taza blessed the plan, his hands raised to the sky, and the Navajo began preparing, their voices rising in song. Hastiin thought of Awinita, her frail smile his anchor, and vowed to lead with courage, the weight of his people's trust heavy on his shoulders. The Navajo gathered by the river at dawn, their ceremony vibrant with drums and chants, a sacred fire blazing at the center. Hastiin stood tall, his voice ringing as he read Awinita's testimony, each word a strike against Slade's lies. Jonah stepped forward, his voice shaky but clear, detailing Slade's poisoned barrels, and the crowd gasped, their anger rising. Taza raised his hands, praying for the ancestors' strength, his presence uniting the people. A young Navajo girl held up Awinita's drawing, its spirals a symbol of their fight, and Hastian's throat tightened, pride mixing with fear. Some townsfolk joined, drawn by the truth, their faces solemn. Hastiin felt the ancestors' gaze, their approval a warmth in his chest. The ceremony grew louder, a defiant cry for justice, but Hastien's eyes scanned the horizon, sensing danger lurking beyond the fire's glow. Baxter's militia charged into the ceremony, their rifles cracking as bullets tore through the air, scattering the Navajo in panic. Taza shouted for calm, his voice steady, but a shot struck his shoulder, and he fell, blood soaking his shirt. Hastiin dove to his side, shielding him, his heart pounding with rage and fear as he pressed a cloth to the wound. The Navajo fought back, hurling stones and sticks, their cries fierce despite the chaos. Baxter pointed at Hastiin, calling him the ringleader, his gun aimed, and Hastiin braced for death. A woman's scream distracted Baxter, giving Hastiin a moment to drag Taza to safety behind a rock. The militia retreated, outnumbered by the Navajo's resolve, but Baxter's parting threat chilled Hastien's blood. He held Taza, praying for his survival, his voice raw with desperation. The ceremony's hope now stained with blood. Hastiin spotted Slade in the chaos, his black vest stark against the dawn, and charged through the crowd, his knife drawn, fury blinding him. Slade turned, his gun flashing, and a bullet grazed Hastian's arm, pain searing but not stopping him. Hastiin tackled Slade, the two crashing into the dirt, fists flying as Hastiin roared for justice. Slade's strength overpowered him, his hands closing around Hastian's throat, and stars danced in Hastian's vision. A Navajo boy threw a rock, striking Slade's head, giving Hastiin a chance to break free. Slade scrambled up, spitting curses, and fled into the desert, his gun lost in the dust. Hastiin staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his arm, his heart pounding with the nearness of death. He looked back at the Navajo, their faces fierce, and swore to finish what he'd started. Ellen ran through the fading gunfire, her dress torn, clutching a letter from a federal reporter promising to investigate Slade. She climbed onto a rock, her voice clear as she read the letter aloud, its words a beacon of hope to the Navajo. Jonah stood beside her, repeating his testimony, his voice stronger now, and the crowd cheered, their spirits rising. Ellen handed Hastiin a list of new witnesses, her eyes bright with defiance, and he gripped her hand, gratitude overwhelming him. She hugged him, whispering her pride, and Hastien's heart ached with love and fear for her safety. A townsman scribbled notes, vowing to spread the story, and Hastiin felt the tide turning. The Navajo chanted, their voices a wall against Slade's lies, and Hastiin stood taller, the reporter's promise a light in the storm. A federal reporter arrived at the village, his coat dusty from travel, and Hastiin met him with a pounding heart, pouring out the story of Slade's crimes. The reporter listened, his pen flying across a notebook, nodding at the witness list and Awinita's testimony. He examined the singed paper, his eyes narrowing at the evidence, and promised a front-page story to expose Slade. Hastien's voice shook as he spoke of Awinita's fever, her life hanging by a thread, and the reporter's face softened, vowing justice. The Navajo gathered, offering food and thanks, their hope palpable. The reporter photographed the ceremony's remnants, capturing Jonah's resolute face, and Hastien's chest swelled with fragile optimism. He looked to the sky, feeling the ancestors' approval, their strength guiding him. The reporter left, his satchel heavy with truth, and Hastiin prayed it would be enough. The reporter's article hit the towns, and Slade and Baxter were arrested, their faces grim as federal marshals chained them. The river's poisoning stopped, its waters slowly clearing, and the Navajo land was declared protected, a victory hard won. Hastiin returned to Awinita, his heart breaking as he found her lifeless, her fever claiming her just as justice prevailed. He held her, tears falling, her smile forever etched in his memory, her courage the spark that saved their people. Ellen stood by him, her hand in his, their love accepted by the Navajo, a quiet promise to honor Awinita's legacy. Carter faced trial, his empire crumbling, and the truth of the poisoning spread, vindicating Hastiin. He carved a silver bracelet, telling Awinita's story, his voice steady with grief and pride. The Navajo honored him, their unity a testament to love's power, though Hastien's heart bore the weight of loss forever.